Judge, I want to ask you, from a legal perspective, can you talk a little bit about the crucifixion and who it was for and why they did it, and maybe even specifically this crucifixion?
Well, I can. Actually, the legal implications of the crucifixion are far fewer than with the arrest and the trials, as we've talked about in prior weeks. There's several things here I guess I would mention. First of all, as this movie clearly depicts, it was the Romans who had the authority legally to condemn a person to death by crucifixion. And in some ways, I hate to even talk about that because that detracts from what actually happened here. It's not accurate to say that the Romans put Jesus to death. It is not accurate to say even that death was as a result of crucifixion, because Jesus himself told us that he laid down his life voluntarily. He surrendered himself to the will of the Father. So in some ways, talking about the legal implications, as I mentioned last week, is a bit counterproductive. But it's important context, I think, and that context is this, and Dr. Fuller mentioned that a little bit. Crucifixion was not something that was unique to the Romans. It goes all the way back to the Persians. It was used extensively by the Persians as a form of capital punishment. The Greeks used it. The Romans, as Dr. Fuller indicated, perfected it. But there's some interesting things about it in Roman law. First of all, crucifixion was not typically a form of capital punishment that could be inflicted on a Roman citizen. It was used almost exclusively for non-Roman citizens. There were a couple of exceptions to that. One was treason. Another was desertion by a soldier. But the reason I think that's significant here is that although the religious leaders, as we discussed last week, started out accusing Jesus of blasphemy, they really changed their tactics when Jesus was before Pilate. And when they saw that Pilate was wavering, they then changed the accusation to one of treason. And the interesting thing about that for me is that when you think about Jesus' appearance before the two political authorities here, Herod and Pilate, both of them found him to be without fault. And yet Pilate gave him up to be crucified, essentially finding him guilty of treason. And, during the course of the week, this week and in prior weeks as well, we have exchanged questions with each other. And Dr. Fuller emailed me an interesting question this week that relates to the legal implications of this. And the question that Dr. Fuller asked me had to do with the label that was affixed to the cross. And if you read all four of the Gospels together, we know that what that label said was, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." And Dr. Fuller's question to me was whether that was just an attempt by the Romans to mock Jesus, which it was, or whether it really was an accusation of treason. And it was both, really. I mentioned in one of our prior discussions that all of the legal rules were broken here, and they were, from beginning to end. And I mentioned that one of the things that was lacking here was an indictment, a legal written charge against Jesus. And the reason I think this label that was affixed is important is because it really took the place of an indictment, because the Roman practice was to actually hang around the neck of the accused a placard that stated what the crime was. We see these, to put this in modern day terms, we see these proposals in the legislature all the time for people convicted of, say, drunk driving to pick up trash on the highway wearing a vest that says, "I'm a drunk driver," or something to that effect. Well, that's what the Romans did. They attached the indictment around the neck of the accused because they wanted the punishment to have the full deterrent effect. So it has significance there as well. But not only do I think some discussion of the legal aspects of it detracts from the theological implications of it, I think it detracts some from the medical implications too, and that's the primary focus of our discussion tonight. So I think I'll leave the implications at that.
Brandon,
Yeah, I would just add to that, when you think about the crucifixion, there are it's very important for us to understand just how brutal it was. A Roman philosopher who lived about 100 years before the time of Christ, his name was Cicero, and he's held out as an example citizen for all the students at Tusculum. Is one reason I wanted to throw him in there. But Cicero spoke about the crucifixion. When he spoke about the crucifixion, he said it was one of the most cruel and most heinous of all acts that human beings could engage in. And that it was so heinous and it was so cruel that he said not only should the cross be far from any Roman citizen's body, but he said that even the word cross should be far from our thoughts, far from our eyes, and far from our ears. And I think sometimes in the Christian community, we celebrate the cross because of its redemptive value. But for every other people group in the world, the cross was something that was just excruciating. And I use that term with every degree of etymological precision possible, because Alex Metherell says that when you look at the terminology and the way people try to describe just how brutal the crucifixion was, he says that there was no term. And so they created the term excruciating to describe the pain on the cross, literally meaning the prefix ex, meaning out from among or out of the crucifixion. And that's the kind of pain that Jesus would have gone through.
And not only was it a very excruciating form of capital punishment, it was the most shameful, the most disgraceful form of capital punishment. It was very public. It was drawn out over several hours as opposed to other kinds of capital punishment. And in Roman society, there was a certain amount of shame and disgrace that was associated with crucifixion itself.